And here we go. What if the person who hurt you most could actually help you heal? Today's guest isn't just a trauma-informed coach. He is a self-aware narcissist who's dedicated his life to helping women break free from toxic relationships. This is an episode you won't forget. Welcome to Happiness on Tap, where we bring you inspiring stories and practical insights for a happier, more fulfilling life. Your go-to podcast for uplifting conversations that stir the heart and ignite the spirit. I'm your host, Leann, and today's episode is both powerful and rare. We're diving deep into the world of narcissistic abuse with Ben Taylor, founder of Raw Motivations, a global platform that helps women break free from narcissist abuse and rebuild their lives the way they are meant to live. Ben isn't your average coach. He is a self-aware narcissist in recovery, using his unique perspective to expose what really happens inside these relationships and how survivors can truly break free. With over 450,000 followers and a library of trauma-informed tools like the Stack, Core 4, and the Freedom Formula, Ben is shifting the narrative on emotional manipulation and healing. Through his coaching, courses, and community, Ben is on a mission to empower women to trust themselves again and to realize that freedom isn't just possible, it's inevitable. Whether you've lived through narcissistic abuse, know someone who has, or just want to understand the inner workings of toxic dynamics, this episode is a must listen. So let's welcome Ben to the show. Ben, I'm so excited to have you here with us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
We're going to get right into it because your story is definitely one that I think will resonate with a lot of people and show them so much information. You describe yourself as a self-aware narcissist in recovery, a phrase that we rarely hear. Can you share what that journey of awareness and healing looked like for you personally?
Yeah. So it's been a long journey for sure. There's been a lot of different steps and hiccups and pieces along the way and trying to be able to shift and grow who I was. There's a piece of me that always knew there was something wrong or something different than me. Like that there was something that didn't actually add up, but I didn't want to admit that anything was wrong with me. I wanted to view that I was always right, that I was never wrong. And even growing up, there's pieces of realizing early on of different levels of manipulation and lies that I could do or have in order to hide who I actually was or to be able to get what I wanted. And so it continued to just pervade over a period of years where it finally got into a place where I started getting involved in different relationships and started having one relationship after another. And it'd be like a new relationship be starting right as the old one sort of ending. And it just became this cycle and this loop of always being with other people, always looking for that validation, that attention from other women in my life. And going through high school, going through college, and then eventually out of college, I thought that was going to get fixed by getting married. And just thought that was the best next step, the next thing that I should do, and that it would work out after that. But it didn't. And after the first year of marriage, that was an awful first year of marriage. I got to a place where I started investing my time into other people and got to a place where I started another affair and moved through multiple affairs over the first several years of our relationship, majorly impacting my life, my world, and hurting my family. To a place where I lost my job, to a place where my wife left and took our daughter, went out of state. All of these pieces you would have thought would have brought me to a place of having an awareness, but that awareness was kind of a slow process over a period of time. It was that understanding that something was different. Inside of the workplace, it was understanding that that difference also attributed to my personality, how I interacted, how I connected, how I did or didn't have empathy for other people, like how all of those things started to match up in different ways. And so inside of different personality tests were kind of like the first piece of like the DISC personality tests, Myers-Briggs, 16 personalities, Enneagram, different pieces of like, oh, I relate differently to other people. I was introduced to a couple different books inside of that. One of them was actually Brene Brown's book, Daring Greatly, which talks about shame and even talks about narcissism in there that I kind of conveniently skipped and ignored for the first couple times I read it. But started to realize that shame had a big impact on my world, and read different books on emotional intelligence to start learning and understanding, okay, how do I guess I don't have emotional intelligence. I didn't really know what that was. That emotional vulnerability wasn't there. And then as my life continued to fall apart with different things happening inside of the workplace, different things happening at home, I just tried to be able to figure out, I don't know what's wrong with me. And I remember saying one time to my wife as we were cleaning up the kitchen before she left, there's this piece of almost like an awareness piece of like, I think something's wrong. Maybe I don't know, maybe I'm like a sociopath because I don't care about people. And so we talked about it and looked it up. And she was like, I think you're a narcissist. And at that point, I was like, no, like can't be that. And I didn't even know what it was. But when I started looking into it and realized that there was pieces of it that were me, but I didn't want to acknowledge it. So I told her that wasn't true, gaslit her, talked to the people to make sure they told her that I wasn't a narcissist, like the whole gambit. But inside of that, it started different pieces of, okay, there's different aspects that I need to work on. And I eventually went to EMDR therapy and did that for a period of about 6 months or so. That kind of broke some barriers and walls down that let me start to access and kind of work through different pieces. But still, the awareness was there, but it wasn't shifting enough. Ended up going to talk therapy after that, was involved in talk therapy for about 5 months. And then that's when my wife left, because she still wasn't seeing the shifts, the change. I was knowing and learning the stuff, but I wasn't actually applying it to a way that it was showing up different inside of my world. And during that time, I also got shipped off to a sexual addiction intensive, viewing like most people were thinking that that's what I had. Maybe I was a sex addict. And coming back from that, I realized I'm not. And it was a piece that was an outpouring of my narcissism and how I was showing up in the way that I wanted to, just to get whatever I wanted. And so with my wife being gone, it ended up being this piece where I didn't have anybody else to blame. Right. Didn't have a job, and the house back then was on like different COVID relief and different pieces that were happening. There was aspects of, there's no one that I could point to except me. And so it began this slow process of working through, well, I would describe it as like rewiring my thought process, like my mindset, like who I was, like what I was thinking, how I was dealing with guilt and shame and all the different pieces. Continued in therapy and been doing that for going on 5 years now. And inside all of that, was able to start shifting my mindset, got introduced to different coaching programs and different men that were able to come alongside me to hold me accountable and actually help me see that if I wasn't going to show up as a man, like I had to be able to tell the truth. And that was a piece that I knew I lied to other people, but I didn't want to admit that I lied to myself. So once I started seeing that and started going through the process of learning how to tell the truth about where I was, what was happening, what was actually going on, how I was actually showing up, that's when I started seeing different shifts and changes, even more so inside of my world, because I was able to start realizing how I'm showing up, how I'm interacting, how I'm talking, how I'm destroying different families, different lives, different people inside of our world. And my wife came back for a period of time, first off, just to be able to get her clothes. And she was getting ready for a new season. She still had clothes there. So she was like, well, I'll go back. And when she did, she noticed there was a difference inside of me. And there was something that had shifted in my communication, my interaction with her. And at first she was very leery of it. She's like, okay, well, I came up anyways. I'll spend a couple of days. I'll give it a week. Right. And then she started noticing it didn't shift. It didn't change. I was still progressing inside of that. She gave it another week, gave it a month, and then ended up staying. And inside of that, we then eventually got into couples therapy. She'd already been doing her own for a while. I'd been doing mine for a period of time and started working on things like as a couple to try to rebuild and try to rework through the things that had been so traumatic for her, the things and the damage that I had caused. And it's been a journey. It's been an entire process. But now sitting here several years after all of it and 5 years inside of all this journey, we have a new daughter. So we have a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old right now. We have an amazing marriage that's connected, that's having us move in the direction that we both actually want to go. And life is completely shifted compared to what it's ever been before. So the recovery process has been long, has been intense, has been really difficult and hard, but it's been also one of the most beautiful journeys to do that. And then now do what I do now, which is to help other people heal, grow, and shift, transform their lives.
And first, let me just thank you and honor you for sharing your story. That is the most powerful part of what brings us here, why I wanted you here on the show, because it's our story that shows people that we can change. It shows people that there is possibility for our future, that there is a path, and that there are people out there willing to walk alongside of us on that journey. I want to touch on a couple of things that you talked about. One, I love that you shared that you started with reading Brene Brown. She was definitely a huge impact in my life as well. Coming out of trauma or going through trauma. I think I own all of her books now, finally, and have read them all a few times through. In fact, actually, just last week, started rereading Atlas of the Heart, which I only read when I was deep, deep in trauma recovery, or not even recovery, response. You know, I was in brain fog and memory loss and anxiety and panic, but the fog was so thick that I didn't know how to communicate those things. Like I didn't even know how to say the words or express them in a way that somebody else could understand them. And I felt like when I went to the doctor to talk to my doctor about it, that it was my fault that she didn't understand why I was there. And that's why she only gave me a prescription for an antidepressant. And in reality, I realized that it really wasn't my fault, that I wasn't explaining it right, but her amount of time that she could give to listen to me, or her ability within Western medicine to help. But yeah, I'm a huge Brene Brown fan. I think her work is very inspiring and educating, and does help us see a map, see words in a different perspective, because it really helped me look at, like, I used to think mine was abandonment issues, but learning like the difference between abandonment and betrayal and anger and sadness and despair and anguish, and just words with definitions that made sense to my cloudy brain. And I know you talked about the fog, so I definitely want to hear about that too. I also love that you shared that you did your own therapy, your wife was doing her own therapy, and then together you came together and did group counseling. And I think that is also, again, a very powerful thing. I think when I have had couples that I've coached, that I prefer to start there. I don't want to jump directly into couples coaching unless they have already been doing individual work.
Right.
Because what I've seen in the past is the woman's doing the work and the man wants the woman to fix him while she's still on her own journey.
Right.
Congrats on the baby. That's awesome.
Thank you.
You know, I'm excited for everything you do and how you're helping people and watching that grow.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So for many survivors, narcissistic abuse is invisible and insidious. What are some of the most common signs someone in a toxic relationship and doesn't even realize they're in it? I've been there. I know it.
Right. Yeah, there's a ton. Like just to highlight a few. One is easily the piece that you mentioned, which is the fog. And that's oftentimes just like a layer of confusion, almost like a lack of motivation, kind of like sluggishness that happens. That's what it feels like in one sense. It's not that the person's being lazy, but it's almost like a lack of purpose that impacts their world because of all the things that are affecting them from the outside in, from the toxic guy that they're with. And so the fog oftentimes is this confusion that rolls over of like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's going on. I don't know how to articulate things. I don't know. There's just like the brain fog is the best way to describe it, but it's that confusion piece that impacts a person's world. And you'll see this impacted in multiple ways. And one of the other ways that you'll see it inside of a toxic relationship is one, being with a guy that doesn't respect boundaries. And the boundaries being for not for him, but the boundary is for you, right? So like for me, like a boundary is for me, not for someone else, right? And so oftentimes you'll have someone in a relationship that just doesn't care about what another person's values are or the direction they want to go or who they are, and it will be something that starts to slide them off course, not just not just a u-turn, but just a slight, just like a deviation off of like where a person actually wants to be. And that could be like a warning sign of like, wait a second, toxic or not, this person's pushing me in a way that's not actually where I want to go, or not actually who I want to be, or how I want to show up. Because narcissists oftentimes will target the aspect of a person's boundaries and a person's identity. If they can cross over either one of those or push either one of those, then they know they have a giant lever to be able to kind of manipulate which way a person actually goes and how they react and how they respond. Sometimes it could be the piece where sometimes people are getting blamed for things that they've never even done. Right. Like I had a client that she got like yelled at and screamed at for wearing a certain outfit out in public. And so much so that she was like questioning herself. And then she was talking to me and she was actually, I don't think I've ever wore that out in public. But it was a piece that she believed it for a period of time because of how much he said it, you know, very emphatically, very much like he knew what was true. And so lying and gaslighting are big pieces that happen inside of narcissistic abuse, even though they're not technically part of the 9 traits that happen, but they typically are exemplified because a narcissist is trying to be able to hide from their own guilt, from their own shame. And so being with someone who's consistently lying, being with someone who is trying to make a person doubt their reality or doubt what's actually real or what's going on, those can be big pieces. Sometimes you have some of the more subtle signs of everything being very similar or being it's the same. Whether you have the toxic guy where all of a sudden his vulnerabilities are the same as your vulnerabilities, or his likes are the same as your likes. And they'll do different pieces of mirroring a person because it's the easiest to make another person connect and even fall in love when they're falling in love with a version of themselves. And so being able to manufacture that, and narcissists will build a mask to try to make sure that that person only sees what they want them to see. And then later, when that perfect image shatters, like the mask cracks, that they no longer hold up the facade. But sometimes those can be some of the subtle, and sometimes they're very subtle, but it's like the subtle ways that different narcissist people can like step into it. Like they can step in and start abusing in different ways because a person starts to forget, get confused, and get lost inside the relationship.
Wow, you covered a lot of really good ones. I know, and you mentioned not that, these aren't the 9 traits.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you have a free gift that you're going to be offering later up. It's on those 9 traits. I hope people stick around to make sure they pick that up. We'll come back to talking about that more. You definitely covered on some that I'm familiar with, boundaries and identity.
Mm-hmm.
When I finally got out of a toxic relationship, I had no idea who I was at all. And I didn't think about it until I was on my own, decorating my first apartment after ending a 20-year marriage, having never lived alone, and had no idea how to decorate that space or even what I liked. My identity had completely been shattered and destroyed. And I thought, okay, well, I'm a wife and a mom, and that's who I am. And that took a long time for me to really unravel all that and realize that I was more than a wife and a mom. Yes, I was a wife and a mother, and I love being a mother, and I will always be a mother, but I'm so much more than that. So thank you for covering that one as well. Mirroring, I hadn't thought about that, but once you said it, then I was like, oh, yeah, I know that one too.
Right. Yeah. A very, very subtle one, but it's also very easy to step into the manipulative, exploitative piece that people won't realize because they'll do like mirroring with vulnerabilities is a good one to be able to use as leverage, right? To use levers against another person. And then mirroring different likes and dislikes produces connection. And so then it's like, oh, we like the same thing. We connect in the same way. Like that produces like a connection. But when a narcissist mirrors vulnerabilities, one, they'll like they'll fake vulnerabilities, right? They'll have the false vulnerabilities about their past. That's one of pieces. Narcissists oftentimes can be very vulnerable about things that happened when they were 5, right? But they're not going to be vulnerable about their emotions in the moment of like what's happening now or this week or this month or this year even, right? It's always going to be stuff that's in the past that makes the supply think that they are vulnerable when they're actually not. It's just using and playing off of things in the past. And then sometimes when a narcissist will mirror that same vulnerability, it does also another connecting thing. It really is another version that's establishing another tie, another bond inside of the trauma bond. Because when you break it down, a lot of times a narcissist will mirror someone's vulnerabilities. So the person with the vulnerabilities feels the weight of that vulnerability because they know how much it impacts their world. And so when they realize, wow, they struggle with the same exact thing, I need to give them more love, more care. Maybe I can help fix that when they haven't even fixed the vulnerability inside themselves. But it's an automatic thing of like, oh, I totally get that. That's what I struggle with. Let me help you more. And I know that's another way that a person can get entrapped inside of a toxic relationship too.
Ouch. Another deep reality. Another deep reality. I guess I didn't really see all that clearly until you really started to go into it. So thank you very much for that. You quickly mentioned trauma bonds.
Mm-hmm.
So trauma bonds are a huge part, I know, of why people stay stuck. What makes the bond so powerful, and how can somebody begin to break free from it?
Yeah. So I'll start off by like defining it, how I define a trauma bond. There's tons of different definitions out there. I boil it down into 3 main things that are creating a bond. And the ultimate piece that's the bond that's holding another person there is the story that they believe. That like ultimately at the very base level, the subconscious programming is believing a story, a reality that might not be 100% true, which is why someone might know the truth logically, but their heart might say something different and then they're stuck because they can't get both of them aligned. So they're not going to do anything. So when we talk about trauma bond, I boil it down to the 3 main things. One, it's hope and potential. So you hope that this guy's going to change. You hope that he's going to get better. You hope that he's going to go back to where he used to be, how he used to show up, how he used to be loving and caring. You hope that the mask that you saw was the real thing, not just a mask. And then the potential piece is like, well, he's shown up this way before. So that means he has potential to be able to show up that way. And oftentimes people will still rely on this hope of this untapped potential that, yeah, he has potential, but he's not willing to access it. And he's not willing to actually shift anything. And then people try to think, well, it's my job to get that potential out, right? And then they start taking out of the role. So hope and potential are one of the aspects. And the second thing inside of the trauma bond is cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is like the crux of it all because it boils down to being stuck in the limbo and being stuck in chaos and confusion. So cognitive dissonance is holding two opposing thoughts at the same time. So it's like, does he love me or does he hate me? He says he loves me, but these are his words, but his actions show something completely different. It doesn't make sense. And that state of confusion is where majority of survivors are stuck in for a long period of time. And as a result, they don't know which way to go. Should I stay? Should I go? Like, does he actually care about me? Does he not care about me? Like, is he invested or is he not? Like, which is it? Because it's always going back and forth. And the hard part is over a period of time, he will either implant a story or you will make your own story to justify staying in the middle of the limbo of like his words say that he loves me. His actions say he hates me. Well, he's just stressed out. Well, he's just having a hard time at work. Well, it's because of his past childhood trauma and I can help fix that. And then he won't abuse me as much because he says he loves me. And it's all these pieces that produce this confusion that leaves a person stuck between, I don't know what to do. So I guess I'll just stay here until I figure it out. And oftentimes they just make up a new story. And it sounds kind of like silly in one sense of like making up a new story, but like when we're dealing with this, like this is like subconscious programming that's happening, whether it's external or whether it's internal, right? So like as a survivor, it's either he tells me what to believe or I manufacture what I need to believe in order to justify that I feel kind of crazy, like staying inside of this when it's going back and forth. So cognitive dissonance is the confusion. It's like the limbo that leaves somebody stuck. And how I describe that is like when a person's confused, they don't make a move. Like when a person's confused, they're like, well, I need to get more information. Well, I'm getting like depressed or frustrated because I don't know what to do. Like when a person's confused, nothing happens. And so whenever that happens, you have a person that loses themselves, loses their identity. Like the whole world internally disintegrates because they're confused. They don't make a move and the version of them disappears. So you have the hope and potential, you've got the cognitive dissonance. And then the third thing that kind of ties it all together is the intermittent reinforcement. And this is just the crazy train, the roller coaster that we're on of the highs and lows. One day it's great, the next day it's bad. One day he loves me, next day he doesn't love me. It's kind of like the cognitive dissonance, but it's an actual roller coaster that you're on. It has highs and lows, ups and downs, good moments, bad moments. And over a period of time, you get trained to discount the low moments because the high moments are coming. And then when the high moments are there, you're like, this is what it actually is. This is the hope and potential. This is what life actually is supposed to be. And then we go back into the negative moment. And over a period of time, you get trained that the negative moments can be really long. Or sometimes you can get to a place where that is all that it is. It's just the negative moment. And then I was talking to a client the other day and she phrased this really good. But it's almost like the negative moment can be forever. And then just the hope of having the high becomes the high. And so there actually is never a high, but there's like, oh, I have a hope that it's going to be there. And that feels good for a moment. And then it dumps back down. So when you have the hope and potential, the cognitive dissonance, and intermittent reinforcement, this produces like an addictive cocktail that ultimately disconnects the head from heart, the logic from the emotion, and leaves a person in a confused state where their subconscious has been reprogrammed. The virus has been inserted into the computer software of like, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, like millions of different stories that they believe, external and internal, that ultimately leaves a person stuck inside of that. So that's the first piece. Like that's the trauma bond, that's breaking it down, how I break it down to try to make it make sense of like, what is this amorphous thing that's tying me to another person and makes me keep going back, even though I don't want to. And I know I don't want to, but I still want to. Like it's this back and forth piece. And so when we start grounding people inside of that, it's having them understand it first and foremost. And then it's starting to be able to bring them back to reality by understanding what are the actual facts. Not the truth of the situation, but I'm going to say the facts. And the reason why I delineate between both of those is the narcissist will believe and will say a lot of things that seem like he knows his truth because that's his truth in the moment. He has to believe certain lies in order for him to seem even convincing. What we're trying to go off of is get a survivor grounded in what are the actual facts, what was demonstrated. What is like, if you have like a mental and emotional court case, like we want to know, like, how is he showing up? What's actually demonstrated? What is the evidence? What are the things being said? What are the things being done to help first ground them in the reality? And ultimately, we use the facts to be able to go up against their subconscious of what they believe. Right. Well, he just has a abusive childhood, which is why he's struggling and taking it out on me. Okay. Well, the facts are he's made that choice multiple times. You've told him that it hurts and he still keeps choosing it. He's also not going to therapy. He's also not working on himself to heal that back piece. So regardless if that story is true or not, the facts and reality of how it's impacting you is still hurting you in a negative way. And he's not choosing to do anything about it. So dealing with the facts is what we try to ground people with to be able to help them rewire the subconscious programming, what they're thinking, what they're believing, whether it's been external or internally kind of shifted and implanted inside of their world, which produces that story that leaves a person stuck with the trauma bond.
Wow. Man, I wish I had met you like, 10 years ago. Everything you said was like, check, check, check.
Mm-hmm.
Hope, definitely. Cognitive dissonance, intermittent, all of it. Just like you hit each one so perfectly in my life, and what kept me stuck for so long. The facts were very hazy because while I could see the facts, the hope would kind of tug at it, or the guilt and the shame of just the constant beat down. Nobody believes me.
Right.
But then even witnessing it, in medical records, and not only seeing for myself that I wasn't the only one seeing it, but doctors were seeing the same thing. They were like, well, his actions don't really match his words. And there was a word for that. So they basically were saying, all of your issues are in your head. They're not in your body like you're playing them out to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so it created an even bigger nightmare to sift through. But I think had I had somebody to point these things out to me, it would have been better than walking this alone, because I walked it 100% alone. I had lost all my friends, all my family. Nobody wanted to be around. So I didn't have anyone to talk me through any of what I was going through. So I'm so honored to have you here to share this information. So hopefully somebody else can hear this and know the steps that they need to take, or the help that they can seek that's out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So you have created several frameworks that you work with your clients.
Mm-hmm.
The STAT, Core 4, Freedom Formula. Can you walk us through one or all of them, or whatever you like, and explain how it supports healing?
So the freedom formula was originally created because if we just asked a person, like, what's the story you're telling yourself, they wouldn't know, or whatever they would come up with wouldn't actually be what's affecting them. It'd be affecting them, but it'd be surface level. And oftentimes when we're dealing with healing, we got to go way deeper than surface level to figure out what's actually going on underneath the surface. So we created the freedom formula so we could find the story that a person's telling themselves faster, but also more accurate. Because that's one of the hardest pieces, is how do we get an accurate, succinct version of like what is actually going through your mind in the moment. And so the easiest way to do this is the first step is identifying a trigger. It could be a trigger about anything and everything. And everybody's triggered in something, right? There's not a person on the planet that doesn't have triggers, right? There might be positive or negative triggers, but there's still triggers, right? There's things that activate different emotions, different feelings. So identify triggers. And when you're in a toxic relationship, you have millions and billions of them, right? So oftentimes it's determining what's the main thing that's impacting you or affecting you, right? Whether it's getting a text message on the phone, whether it's him raging out, whether it's whatever it might be. It's like, let's find like one that we can hone in on. We're just going to work on one. And that's the hard part, is a lot of times people want to work on all of them. You work on all of them, you're going to solve none of them. We have to work one at a time. And as people build up more capacity of learning and understanding how to do it, it snowballs and it ends up working through a ton way faster. But if people try to work on all of them, you never get anywhere. So we just focus on one and we look at what is the trigger. And we just have people write it down. Okay, this is what the trigger is. And then we take it to the next step, which is the second piece, is identifying what are the emotions associated with the trigger. The easiest way is pulling up like a negative emotion wheel online and then being like, okay, if we work on this from the middle to the outside of emotion wheel, typically they'll have like 2 or 3 different rungs in the wheel. What are the main emotions? And so when a person sits with a trigger, we identify what's the core one. You know, they might be afraid or be alone or be sad or whatever it might be. We're like, look, what's the core one? And then whatever that one is, we stick inside whatever that pie slice is. So like if someone's like, hey, my main one is anger. Okay, well, we're not going to step into alone or depressed or anything like that. We're only going to look at the pie slice of anger, and we're going to write out all of the emotions that they feel and that they experience while they're associated with that trigger. So we've got one trigger, and we write down a plethora of emotions, as long as they're in that pie slice, about that one trigger. Then from there, a lot of times we'll have to read them out loud just to be able to like, okay, if we sit with these, what are the top 3? Let's narrow it down to the 3 that are impacting you the most. And then we take those and we take them to step 3. And step 3 is putting it into the feeling statements. With this, we're just taking more brushes in our tool belt and we're painting with more colors, basically. So we have one trigger, we've got 3 emotions, and we put them into feeling statements, which is, I feel blank because, and then finish off the saying. So inside of the blank, we just put that emotion. I feel anger because he left me and he's with another woman. I feel upset because, and then the list goes on and on. But we do 3 of those and we flesh them out of like, they have to be tied straight back to the trigger. A lot of this is very like analytical inside of what we do. And what we find is if people try to jump the system or like, oh, I know what it is, and they try to jump ahead to the story, typically they won't find it. Mm-hmm. Every time a person will sit down and be like, here's my story. I'm like, okay, what was the trigger? And they're like, with this. And I'm like, what is the emotion? So like, well, I think they're this. I'm like, okay, let's walk through the process. The story is always different because it's not in alignment. So anyways, one trigger, narrow it down to 3 emotions, put into 3 feeling statements, read 3 feeling statements out loud. They should be a sentence, no more than really 2 sentences max. They're not paragraphs, they're just a sentence. Read those 3 out loud and see which one resonates the most with that trigger. And then from there, we've got our kind of like our guideline. We've got then one trigger, narrowed down to 1 emotion, narrowed down to 1 feeling statement. Inside of that, then we're trying to look at what is the story I'm actually telling myself? What's like the version of reality that's going through my head when that trigger happens? You know, if I could communicate it one more time in a different way, then maybe he would have understood, you know, a story that someone's had before. And being able to see that and be like, okay, that's the story that's running your world in the moment when that trigger's happening. All this first section, these first 4 things is all done in the emotion. If people try to bring logic into the first section, it'll derail it and they'll know what they need to do, but they won't actually be dealing with what's underneath the surface. And oftentimes what we'll call that would be like a misfire. It'd be like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. It's great and it might be a great peg, but it's not going to go in that hole because it's not meant to actually fit that particular object. And so what happens is if someone tries to go all logic at the beginning, we're like, it's great, but we're going to deal with logic in the second half. First half is all emotion because you have to remember emotion is what's running your world when you're triggered. We have to get down to the bottom of what's the actual emotion. So one trigger, one emotion, 1 feeling statement, then 1 story. So we're just, all we're doing is all that is just to be able to get to the story. Then from the story, we take it into 2 more things. The first thing is we have to put that story on trial, which means we have to ask it, what are the facts? What are the facts that prove or deny this story to be true? So going back to the example I said of like one lady being like, if I would have said it one more time in a different way, maybe you would have understood me. Well, then we had to sit down with the facts being like, how long were you together? She was like 10 years. I was like, how many times have you tried to tell it differently? She was like, pretty much like every day. I'm like, okay, if we look at 10 years and every other day, and we look at, 36,000 times that you try to do it differently, what are the odds that one more time is actually going to change it? She was like, it wasn't. Right. Well, how many times did he hear you? How many times was he willing to listen to you? How many times was he willing to actually see your perspective? We start writing all these down because these are different facts, right? Of understanding, okay, this is how it showed up in the relationship. And then a person will take a look at it and be like, okay, I've written down all these facts. Do the facts prove or deny my story? Beginning stages, 9 times out of 10, it's always going to deny because they're believing a false sense of reality, a false story, that a fable is what it will call it sometimes, that's left them stuck there. And so once we realize, okay, we've got the story is actually false based on the evidence and based on the facts we've written down. What is the new story based on the facts? That's where it all switches. So we have to have the news story based on the facts. And when they write the news story, that's what ends up replacing the old story. So then we'll move people into, okay, how do we actually implement this and have maintenance on this over the next week, over the next 2 weeks? And they'll write down the new story. And then whenever they get triggered, they'll go back and they'll review the new story. They'll memorize it. They'll have it in front of them. Like if they're alone in their house, like they'll have them put like sticky notes everywhere. I'll have them record an audio and listen back to them, say it in the mirror. Like you can't remember it like too many times. Like it's the more we can do it, the faster it happens. And oftentimes we'll encourage people, like it has to be like a minimum of like 20 times, 30 times that you go over it a day, right? Because it has to be something that's implanted. We're rewiring the subconscious when we do this. And when this happens, if someone's faithful with it and goes through the whole process, figures out what it is, and then they're faithful at implementing it, oftentimes we'll see changes within a week. Simply because the first 2 to 3 days, it'll feel weird, awkward, and uncomfortable. And then around day 3, day 4, it's like, oh, okay, I actually can see that possibility, see that reality. And sometimes by day 7, it'll be like, no, this is actually true. Like I actually believe it now. This trigger happened and I didn't go off the rails. I didn't get sidelined. I was actually able to reground myself knowing this is what's actually true and it didn't affect me. And that's how long-term we'll either get rid of triggers completely or lower them to a state where they're extremely manageable. So they're just no longer affecting or controlling other people.
Man, that is wonderful. That in and of itself is a great tool that you've shared where people can kind of start thinking about those things on their own.
Mm-hmm.
I did a lot of that work on my own, but the end of completely rewiring my thinking around my triggers was so night and day that I could see my ex or hear a conversation about my ex or have somebody call me to tell me something about my ex and have it not affect me in the least the way it used to where I was trapped in that fight, flight, and freeze. To where if I saw his truck or, whatever the case may be, I would completely shut down and go into panic. To where now I can see him out or know he's near or whatever and have a completely different place where I'm starting from, where I'm empowered, where the triggers aren't the same. So thank you for kind of sharing how you built a wonderful program to help people see those possibilities, rewrite their story, really understand it, and get out of those ruminating thoughts that have been running around our head for so long. So that we are able to move forward and heal.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. And if a person like takes that, I mean, I spent a little bit of time because I went in depth. Like if they just listen to that and walk through it, like that is one of the biggest things. Like doing that will break triggers, will get rid of triggers. Doing that will actually break down all the pieces that needs to get broken down for the trauma bond. Will it take a while? Yeah. Like that's why we bring people in. We have specific tools that they can actually walk through, or a community that supports them, or coaching that helps. But yeah, no, that's the exact process. It's not a piece that's hidden behind closed doors of like, you can't know what it is till you're inside of Raw Motivations. It's just if we give that information and people start applying it, and then they see the difference of how it can actually shift their world, it's massive.
Yeah, I keep my feelings wheel handy because I think, like I said, learning as I was reading through Brene Brown and understanding those emotions and being able to look at it, because I'm very analytical as well. My accounting brain kicks in. I have to be able to see things and be able to research them more deeply to even understand a deeper level of maybe how, in my mind, like the difference between jealousy and envy. Just understanding the true definition of a word sometimes is enough to change your perspective.
Yeah, 100%.
So what are some of the biggest myths that people believe about narcissists or narcissistic abuse that really keeps them trapped in shame or silence?
That's good, because there's a lot of different myths that people believe just over narcissism as well, right? But if we dive deeper into the question of like, what actually is like the myth that keeps a person stuck, that still stems back a lot of times to trauma bond, identity, boundaries, which we've been going around and through. But it's different pieces that the person oftentimes will feel controlled by the other person, and feeling like that sense of identity still goes back to the other person. And so oftentimes there's like the myth and the feeling of like, I can't leave, right? Like it's not possible for me to leave because I'm stuck here. And that's all a choice. And even though it's so hard to say that, because someone will hear that and be like, it's not my choice. Like I can't do it because of X, Y, and Z. Yeah, there's other circumstances like finances, there's kids, there's different things that affect all of that. But ultimately, like it's still like, how I describe it is it's not necessarily that there's no way for things to happen. It's just people learning how to have the right resources to make what needs to happen happen. So a lot of times you'll have people that think that they can't leave. They physically can't. It's because they emotionally can't. They're not sure how to be able to work through that. Sometimes you'll have that inside of finances, right? Like I can't leave because I'm financially strapped. But we've seen people that have moved out and lived with a friend, or moved out and lived with family, gotten a job, gotten back on their feet. They moved out, gotten certifications. We've seen people that have left and gone into homeless shelters, right? Just to be like, let me get out. That way I am out of the trauma, so I can actually have my brain start to clear, the fog clear a little bit, so I can actually focus on being able to have an income, being able to bring something in. Because a lot of times narcissist doesn't want you to have an income, because that means freedom, right? He doesn't want you to be free. He wants you to be stuck. Sometimes you'll have different myths inside of the family, especially with the kids, right? A big piece of like, I'm staying to be able to help the kids, or I'm staying to be able to keep the family together so that they have a dad in their life. And that is a myth and a fallacy that's really toxic a lot of times. That's the best way to put it, is because when you have kids that are inside of a toxic environment long term, you either develop codependent loops where your kids are going to be with narcissists down the road, or sometimes you'll have ones that'll automatically go towards the dad's behavior and they'll become narcissists themselves. So you're actually oftentimes damaging the kids more. One, having them in a toxic environment, and two, having them see that their mom is willing to put up with that and allow that also conditions them to allow that type of behavior in their life long term as well. So many times people are like, but they need to have a dad. They don't need to have a toxic man in their life. Like, we'll see that that does more damage a lot of times than having them away from a toxic person, so they can actually rebuild in a healthy way and actually bring healthy, positive influences into their world. So oftentimes you'll have like the women who will believe like that myth of like, well, I'm staying for the kids. 9 times out of 10, it's never staying for the kids, right? It's staying to be able to not have to deal with some of the pieces that are inside, the shame, the guilt. Sometimes it's pieces of ego of like, I don't want to fail at this. Like, there's many different versions of it. But oftentimes what happens is it ends up hurting more. And sometimes you'll have people that are like, okay, well, I can't leave because then with the kids, then they'll be exposed to him even more. But the difference inside of it is right now they're getting exposed to toxicity and then toxicity put up with, versus when the parents are actually separated. Yeah, if they're 50-50, the kids will go over and they'll see toxicity, and then they'll come over and they'll see healthy. Right now they don't see healthy inside of toxicity, and that's the hardest part. And it gets difficult into how they navigate that. Oftentimes one of the myths that comes even with the kids piece and even with separation is like, well, I can't go no contact because I have kids. I have many different clients and many different people we've worked with that are 100% no contact with kids, simply because they had to be. Some of them had to be because of the abusive situation. Some had to be because of court orders. Some of them had to be because it was just the best for their healing. So what they did is they had it in segmented in different ways. Maybe it was just only communicating over email. Maybe it was only through a court approved app. Maybe it was not really communicating at all because the kids were old enough so the kids could communicate schedules and stuff. Sometimes it was communicating through a lawyer or communicating through a third party. So there's many different ways that people can do that, but oftentimes there's just the automatic myth of like, well, we can't. This has to be what's part of here, and it's just not true. So those would be a couple. There's a ton more, but those would be at least like a couple, like off the top of my head for those.
Check, 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 check. Yep. Can't leave. Been there. Didn't think I had the resources. My self-worth. Didn't think that I deserved anything better than where I was.
Mm-hmm.
Stayed for the kids. Worst decision I ever made in my life. You are 100% right in that I provided them a toxic environment where they got to witness not only the toxicity of it, but my inability to leave and have a healthy life. Yeah, you hit them all right on the head.
I think with that as well, one that I'd kind of tag on to even what you were mentioning was like the self-worth in the piece. And I think one piece that happens with that is I would say self-worth, and I would also say what happens with that is value. Is people start to attribute their value, but the difference is they attribute it to how the other person sees them. Right. So like the myth inside of that in one sense is like, my value and my worth are not my own. Right. They're somebody else's. And that's the hardest piece, is where survival will say, like, here's my value, here's my worth. You take it and you define who I am. Right. And that's the hardest piece of like, wait a second, like what he says, what he does doesn't define who you are, doesn't define your worth, doesn't define your value. You do, by your actions, by your decisions, by just being a human being alive on this planet. Right. Like there's so many different pieces that people will attribute to be like, well, I can't determine that, but they don't realize that they're handing their value over to someone else who doesn't care, who's not willing to see their value, and who never saw their value to begin with, which is why it's just used and abused to be able to get what he wants anyways.
So how do you help these women who are trapped in that self-worth, lack of seeing their own value? How do you help them begin to reconnect with their identity and trust themselves again?
So two things. One is going through Freedom Formula and teach, which is called stacking, which is very similar, but it's just faster. It has more reframes, and once you know the story, you can step into it and be like, "Here's my story," and then it walks you through the rest in a more interactive way to be able to help with the thought process. Because the biggest piece that's happening there initially is the only reason they're in that spot, and the only reason they stay in that spot is simply the story that they believe. So if we work on identifying what is the story and how do we start to shift that story, that's where life starts to be different for them internally. The other piece is working on the confidence piece on the outside. And that's the piece that we call the core four. And the core four is based on helping build people's confidence up in multiple ways, but to help them step into a place of empowerment for who they are and how they're showing up for themselves. So core four is broken up into four areas, which is body, which is like the physical aspect of life; being, which would be like the spiritual, emotional, mental aspect; balance, which would be relationships, specifically those in your life that are healthy; and then business, which would be just the money mindset, the legacy, just going to work, right? Figuring those pieces out. And when we start looking at all four of those, it's building tiny, small practices initially in all four domains so that a person can show up for themselves in a healthy way. When a person hasn't shown up for themselves in such a long period of time, it feels weird, feels awkward. We're just like, hey, like you need to do something like fitness wise. Could be going to the gym, could be going for a swim, could be going for a run, could be going for a walk around the house. Like it can be something so tiny, so small, it doesn't matter. It's just a piece where a person has to start showing up for themselves daily. And that repetition is what breeds confidence long term. You take that and you cascade that over your physical body, your spiritual being, your relationships with healthy people, and how you show up inside of the financial world, and that starts to shift everything. So like we've had people. We have an amazing client that's with us right now. Her name's Beth, and one of the things is she came into the program and she went specifically into our Core Four challenge. And like what she did is she did that for is like 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And she started to see, wait a second, just doing these tiny, small practices, I'm actually showing up for myself and I've never done this before. So she was like, if this helps this much, what's next? And so she moved into one of our next programs. She moved into one of our next programs. And in a period of about 3 months, she went from being like part-time inside the job that she was at, not having confidence inside of herself, not knowing who she was, losing a lot of her identity, to now her confidence level is off the charts, and she actually just got offered a partnership inside of a firm that she never even thought she'd be a part of. So like the massive transition inside of her world all started just from how do we rebuild your confidence one tiny step at a time. And in doing that, people start to see that shift in their identity. So you do that with the story they believe, and you do that with their actions. Those come together in a perfect harmony to be able to shift the person's mindset and embodiment of who they actually are.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a lot of what I uh, do as well with my clients as far as coaching. Um, but the biggest thing is to just getting them to take that, or that for them to make that decision to take that first step, giving themselves permission to take that first step. And then once they start to see those changes, feel those changes, be those changes, then I think our hunger for more is what really propels us forward. Like you were saying, she started with this one program, and then I want more, and I want more, and I want more. Because when we spend our whole life putting everybody in front of us, we don't know how to put ourselves first. And when we start to do it and feel that shift, that's where the power is. And that's, my focus is on, the Gen X woman who spent her whole life taking care of everybody else and not even knowing how to take care of herself, because that was me. I had no idea. No one had ever told me, even a simple thought like, if you put yourself first, if you fill your cup, then you can do so much more.
Right.
Just taking care of myself, eating better, getting exercise, practicing mindfulness. None of that. I didn't have time for any of that. Wasn't even in the mirror, because I was just so busy taking care of raising my kids, taking care of my ex who was addicted to opiates, that I didn't have time to take care of myself. And then when I did it for the wrong reasons, to myself, because I did it because I thought, if I change my physical, then he will love me more.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I was feeling wonderful and I could feel the improvement in myself, I was still 100% empty in those feelings. So yeah, that's kind of the other piece of understanding and having awareness of why you're doing what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I had the same issues with, I started going to yoga. Loved going to yoga because it was something that I was doing for myself after coming out of that 20-year marriage.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just going to a yoga class to improve my flexibility and stability. And at no time was I getting the spiritual side from it or any other of the
Mm-hmm.
wonderful benefits. For me, it was like, oh, I'm learning all these great breathing techniques. But it's like, oh, well, if I breathe this way, I can bend further. You know, it was just the pieces weren't all there.
Yeah.
So having a coach to give you the pieces in the right order is the greatest power that we can give to people. And that's, one thing I say on my website is my greatest gift to you is to share with you the tools and techniques and pieces that I learned that helped me, but give it to you in a way that is meant for your unique journey. And helping people, not like you were talking about earlier, trying to do it all at once, just one little thing at a time. And you see such a greater impact when they do just that one step.
Yeah, for sure.
What role does community and education play in the healing process, and how does your platform support that?
Yeah. So we combine a lot of different things all at once. Inside of all of our teaching and our communication, we try to combine multiple learning modalities all at once. So most people are to some level visual learners. They have to be able to see things. So we'll have people watch things, hear things, listen, type things, write things, because we want to help shift like the mindset inside the education space to be able to help ingrain things and help people shift the fastest, right? So it's all geared in a way to be able to help someone see, understand, own, and even speak their own truth, because that's very essential. That can happen inside of a community setting, but it also happens inside of their individual setting to the community. So we have different practices inside of people going through we call them benchmarks, or different lessons that they're going through, where they'll have different assignments that they have to do. They might complete the freedom formula, a stack. They might go live inside the tribe to be able to share, this is my insight on this lesson, because we want people to start owning their truth. And it's there to be able to help them speak it, because when they speak it, it's different. It hits different. When they declare truth, stuff starts to shift internally. Sometimes people will try to shift a lot of their world with never even speaking it. It's very hard, because sometimes you have to speak it into existence before you actually feel it. It has to be something that you think of, that you actually verbalize. And a lot of these women have to have themselves have permission to even speak it, because they've not been able to speak their own truth at all for a long period of time. So with the education piece, it's brought into a step-by-step plan and a process to help them teach and understand core pieces that need to shift, but also that are putting into practice. I'm a big fan of, I don't just want people to consume more content. And the majority of people that work with me long-term, they are not still watching my YouTube because they're not dealing with toxicity. We're rebuilding their businesses. We're helping them in their new relationship. They're getting connected to God. There's so many different things that have shifted. They're not watching content to keep them grounded at 1 a.m. when they're afraid to be able to text their ex, kind of a thing. So inside of it, like, it's been a piece that's helped massively getting people involved in community for accountability purposes, right? They're accountable to each other, accountable to themselves, accountable to me as a coach. Like, there's multiple levels that it happens. What we've seen is the majority of times when people interact with our program is if they disconnect or if they isolate, they typically won't come back and they typically won't heal. It's a rarity, which I'm so glad that you were on the healing journey. But what we've seen so many times is it's very rare to find people that heal on their own, right? Without having support, connection, therapy coaches, like without having people around them, they're like, yeah, you're not crazy. Like this is actually abuse. Like it's very difficult sometimes for people to navigate just the mind games that he plays with them and that they play with themselves to justify what's going on. So the community piece is really essential. So we have the community piece that interacts inside of, you can almost think of it like an internal Facebook where everything's secure. So we can drop in assignments, people can share what's on their mind, like where they're stuck at. And then we also bring people inside of coaching calls because the goal inside of that is accountability, teaching, but then also answering questions, working through things. And our coaching calls are very different than what you'd consider inside of regular traditional therapy or even some counseling, because we're not there to have people vent, and we're not there to have people just say, this is my whole life story of how it's affected me. They could share some of that inside the community, but the coaching calls are specifically geared to like what's going on, what's the accountability piece that needs to happen, what needs to shift. Because someone can sit there and they can vent every single thing that they're struggling with, but until we actually have them take action, nothing's going to change. So we're very action oriented. It's not, doesn't have to be big action, right? It just has to be something small, something that is consistent that we start building upon so that people can shift and grow and develop who they are. So all of the coaching, all the pieces that happen inside of Raw Motivation is geared to bring people in the community, have them walk through this process together, ahead or behind each other, help support and lift each other up. And then also adds just a different level of accountability, different level of being able to have those connections and the communications with people so that they can truly connect and they continue to rise up and grow how they're seeing themselves and how they're healing.
Yeah, I think you've done an amazing job with putting it together in that way specifically. I agree. If people isolate, they don't come back.
Mm-hmm.
They just go right back down the same rabbit hole that got them there in the first place, even though you can point out where they've grown and the direction they're going, they're still not
Mm-hmm.
showing up consistently enough. Um, and that is something that I push with my clients is consistency. You know, they only get one reschedule in a 90-day period for an emergency. But with people, it's so easy to create a new excuse for not showing up for themselves
Mm-hmm.
that it becomes a bad habit. And if they're not going to show up for themselves, then they're not going to accomplish their goals in the long run.
Yeah.
And so I don't allow them to make it any further than once a week. We get together once a week consistently. We have emergency in between, emails, texts, phone calls. I'm always available. But unless it's, something absolutely critical, we're not going to reschedule any sessions. And so I actually make them schedule all their sessions in advance because I'm very calendar oriented. And if
Mm-hmm.
you are on my calendar, you are on my calendar, and I am not going to reschedule with you unless I'm dying.
Right.
So, and I expect people to know that that's a two-way street with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I expect you, and it's in my agreement, I'm going to show up for you and you're going to show up for me. And together we're going to walk this path.
Mm-hmm.
So I love the way you've set it up. Community is always great. It's so much more empowering when, especially women. I think we do well in community. We need that. I had a women's circle that I did with my ladies for 3 years. And, that was something that they craved to do, was be in community with each other. And we had ages from early 20s to late 60s, all in the same room that could share our stories and support and lift each other up. And, so that was very powerful in that, and giving them all the modalities, because the more tools we have in our toolbox, the more we can pick and choose which ones we need at that time.
Right. Yeah.
What you may need, like you said, what you may need in the beginning when you're in early states of trauma or getting out of a toxic relationship are not going to be the same tools that you're going to need 2 years down the road when you have completely changed who you are internally, your values, but you still have those tools if you need them.
Right. Yeah. Very true.
So where can people connect with you? And definitely talk about the wonderful free gift you're going to offer for our listeners today.
Yeah. So people can connect anywhere on social media, just under Raw Motivations. So we're on all the different platforms. So feel free to be able to check us out, follow our content there. And then also just our website, rawmotivations.com. There's a drop down there for a breakthrough call for women. And that's where we sit down and just map out what's going on. Where are you at? What's going on? Where you want to go? What's the gap in between, the obstacles, the things that are affecting you? And if it's a good fit, then we bring you inside of one of our programs. If it's not, then people walk away from that free strategy session just with clarity of like knowing what's going on and the next steps to be able to help them move forward. So that's where they can connect and be able to contact us there. And then one of the free pieces that we're giving out today and be linked inside of all this is just what we call the 9 traits. And the 9 traits is the 9 diagnostic traits of narcissistic personality disorder. If you Google what are the 9 traits, you're not going to find them very easily. And if you do, you're not going to find them exactly the written how they are in the DSM-5, on the diagnostic criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. So what we've done is we've taken that, we put it into a PDF for people to be able to see, hey, this is what the actual definition of it is, and this is what it actually looks like. And here's some real life examples, because we've noticed over a long period of time that even counselors, therapists, people inside of that field, oftentimes you'll find people that know about narcissism and know the traits, but they don't know how to identify it because it looks very different in the real world versus what it does in a textbook. So we try to take it from textbook to real life applications to people can see and understand of what it is and how to be able to help like identify it. Because if you don't know what it is, it makes it difficult. And on top of that, what we try to tell everybody too is at the end of the day, whether a person is or is not a narcissist, it actually doesn't matter. What matters the most is the abuse that you're willing to accept. That's the piece that we want to make sure people understand. And if that can help by having a label so you see it, just know that the label doesn't define the long term in the healing process. Just gives you a target of what you need to work on or what you need to shift inside of your world to help you heal. So hopefully some of those resources that we have can be able to help assist in that.
Thank you so much for sharing that with our listeners. I know it's going to be valuable. I know I'm going to enjoy having it in my toolbox as well. Again, as I stated before, education and definitions is so empowering for me. Plus those real life, I think you can read something like you said in your early, when we were first talking about how your wife said, well, I think you're a narcissist. And either it was because you didn't want to admit you were one, or you didn't truly know what that meant. Mm-hmm. So, knowledge is always our greatest power. Education is the best thing we can do for ourselves, is continue to, thrive and be as educated as we can be. I always call it the more you know, for sure. Mm-hmm. Ben, I want to thank you again for your courage, your transparency, and your powerful mission. It is not often that we get to hear from somebody who has been on the inside of narcissistic patterns and is using that insight to truly help others heal. To everyone listening, you are not crazy, you are not broken, and you are absolutely worthy of a life free from manipulation. If this conversation resonated with you, please share it with somebody who needs to hear it. And don't forget to check out Ben's work at Raw Motivations and follow him on social media for daily support and practical tools. All of the links will be in the show notes, including his free gift. And until next time, keep choosing joy, keep choosing healing, and keep your happiness on tap. Ben, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.